Jay Parsons. I'm a professor and farm and ranch management specialist in the Department of Agricultural Economics at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Today's webinar is part of our Center for Agricultural Profitability's weekly webinar series, coming to you every Thursday at noon Central Time. The full schedule of our webinars is available on our website at cap.unl.edu. That's cap.unl.edu. When it comes time to turn your farm or ranch business over to a successor, how do you start the process? Today, we'll learn about some of the key issues in planning the transition to the next generation and planning your estate. This webinar will cover inheritance versus legacy and the 4 pillars of a lasting legacy. It will provide guidance on conducting family discussions about succession and estate planning, as well as the key issues of estate planning and management succession. Presenting today, we are happy to be joined by Jeff Tranel, an agricultural and business management economist with Colorado State University Extension. His professional interests focus on estate and succession planning, financial management, income tax management, and human resource management. Jeff, it is a pleasure to have you joining us today.
Thanks, Jay. Appreciate it very much.
I will be turning the program over to Jeff here in just a second for his presentation. I'd just like to remind our listeners that we will be having a question and answer session following the presentation. Feel free to submit your questions at any time during this presentation by typing them into the Q&A box as it's listed on your screen. I'll be monitoring those throughout the program and then presenting them to Jeff at the conclusion of his presentation during the Q&A session. So with that, Jeff, I'm going to go ahead and turn the floor over to you, and we'll visit with you when you're finished with your presentation.
Sounds good, Jay. Thank you. Let's make sure I get this set up right. There we go. I assume you can see that, Jay?
We sure can. Take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone. I appreciate this opportunity to visit with you about estate and succession planning, or as you will learn more, I call it legacy planning. Let's start with some terminology, make sure we're all on the same page with this. Estate planning is simply inheritance. It's the disposition of property at that time of death. A big problem with inheritance is that it tends to be thought of as synonymous with money. It implies that one's life work can be coldly calculated in dollars and cents. And very sadly, it is often fraught with legal hair splitting. On the other hand, succession planning pertains to more of a somewhat orderly transfer of ownership and management of the businesses prior to one's death. It involves the why and the how of turning over our businesses to future generations. But I pose that these two terms are insufficient. There is more to who we are, what we have created over our lifetimes, and our influences on our families and our communities. I prefer the term legacy. It captures all facets of our lives, things like family traditions, individual values, accumulated wealth, and our impacts upon our communities and industries as we share and pass on ourselves to future generations. And speaking of future generations, a study conducted across the United States of both employees and business owners, teachers, farmers and ranchers, and others revealed that younger generations found the non-financial aspects of our lives to be 10 times more important than the financial aspects of our lives. Our children want more than our money. They want to hear our experiences. Many of us have heard children, grandchildren, and other young people ask the question, what was it like before microwaves? What do you mean you had to go up to the TV and turn the dial to change channels? And there were only 2, maybe 1 channel on the TV. So is this question that I pose to you, is this you, or does this represent some people in your lives? I'm headed to the attorney. And if I were the woman in this case, I'd be scared out of my britches. Sure, a person can go to an attorney and have estate documents drafted. The problem is that the plan will almost certainly not work. These plans will be incomplete and they will not be specific to our needs and those of our family. There have been no communications among family members, and most likely there will be no thought given to future needs of the business and the family. I was working with a family in northwestern Illinois about a year ago, and we had some of these discussions, and I made sure that the farmer and rancher, or the farmer and his wife, did talk to their 5 children, et cetera. And they kind of had that going on. And I warned them, when you go to your attorney, if within 20 minutes he says, we're going to put you into an LLC or subchapter S or some legal entity, and we're going to rock and roll from there. I said, if that happens, I want you to be polite, say thank you, and leave, and find a different attorney. And sure enough, that happened. Within 15 minutes, he said, the attorney said, well, we're going to put you into a subchapter S. And he did exactly what I said and told him to do. And a subchapter S may have been the right strategy or legal entity for him, but that attorney did not know anything about his family and their needs and desires for the farmer ranch and for the future of that family. So that guy went to another attorney. That attorney, in turn, it was 30 minutes of discussion, good discussion, inquisitive discussion, before he even mentioned possibilities. And then it wasn't one single legal entity. It was, well, if we use a subchapter S, here are the pros and cons to that. If we use an LLC, here's the pros and cons to that, and went through a few other entities. And they finally agreed on one, and it worked very well. So what are your fears as you start thinking about the future of your farmer ranch business and of your family? Are your concerns estate taxes? What about retirement, going into the nursing home, choosing a successor, or even talking with your family about these sensitive issues? It's scary stuff. And we need to set aside our fears and move forward with this. It's too important not to. Let's start at the beginning. Who are you? Think of this box on the left side, and this is a very simplistic analogy, but think of that box as you, your lifetime, and all those things on the right as what made up you. We all have pedigrees and personalities. We have a bunch of personal stuff. In some cases, too much personal stuff. We have family traditions. Of course, we have a farmer ranch, business, and other wealth. Everything that makes up who you are, actually, as you live your life, goes into that box. It's accumulating, it builds upon itself. We have developed who we are over time. The question is, how do we get us out of that box? How do we share ourselves with future generations? Well, I and 2 colleagues at the University of Wyoming and Colorado State University created the process and support materials, including a free online course titled Leaving a Lasting Legacy. And it consists of 4 pillars which cover all aspects of our lives. Pillar 1, as you can read, is titled Values and Life Lessons. It is designed to help us share with future generations our family traditions and stories, our sense of ethics and morality, faith, hopes and blessings for future generations, and all of our lifetime experiences. The second pillar, called personal possessions of emotional value are all the things that we have passed down to us from past generations or have special meanings to our families. Think about who's going to get grandpa's spurs that have been hanging on the wall, or the buffet that's been in the kitchen that belonged to great grandma came across on a covered wagon. Whatever the case may be, whatever those things are that are important to us. As we think about who should get those specific items, we should focus on the purpose of those items in the life of the family. Another story is that my grandmother had a set of glass bowls, and those of us that are older will remember getting things in detergent boxes. Those old soap boxes, you'd get green stamps, you would get bowls, you'd get glasses, and they collected those. Well, my grandmother collected a set of glass bowls that whenever we would visit her, and we were in Wyoming and Colorado, I grew up on the state line, ranches in both states, and she lived in Wisconsin. So when we were back there, we would eat ice cream out of those bowls. And it wasn't the importance of eating the ice cream, it was the meaning and the discussions and the stories that she was able to share with us as we enjoyed that ice cream. Anyway, as grandma got towards the end of her life, she gave those to my sister, who is the family gatherer. When we visit the town that my mom and other sisters live in, we stay with her. She brings us all together, and we use those ice creams periodically to remember those family stories. And now at the next generation, I have one niece, and she's the family gatherer, and she will receive those glass bowls, and she lives in the same town as her mom, so it's not a problem to use those. But again, that will be a time to share stories and traditions and beliefs and laugh and cry and do all the things that families do. The third generation is one that we really don't talk about in this country. It's used to describe, for people to describe what they want for the end of their lives, to talk about that with family members. It's instructions and wishes to be fulfilled. What do we want for retirement? At what point do you take away the keys from mom so she's not driving? At what point should I go into the nursing home? All of these things that are really touchy-feely, and I know farmers and ranchers, being one of them, we struggle with this, but we need to talk about it. And it becomes especially important as families become scattered, some cases around the world. We can ease the grief or their grief, we don't have it when we die, by telling them what we want to have happen. And this isn't just a life and death, who pulls the plug, who agrees on this. It's also a case where, what medicines do you take at the end? Are you taking those medicines? Mom, how can we care for you as you start to slow down? Whatever that is, make some decisions about who will be final decision makers. Is it our spouse? I know in Colorado, if there's not a spouse, those final decisions for medical purposes, if there is not a power of attorney granted, that power goes to the eldest child. Well, what if the eldest child has one way of thinking and the other children in the family have the opposite way of thinking? Now you have family conflict there. Through discussions, you can overcome some of this. And the fourth pillar is called financial assets and real estate. It is designed to help us talk about our desires for our land and other titled property. Again, it's not a how, but what's the purpose? What do we want to accomplish? What are our goals through the use of that land and our strategies for passing it on or not passing it on? Further in that, the lasting legacy process also provides strategies for family discussions about our legacies in a section called Communications, Family Conversations, which is really important. So I want to take a few minutes and talk about that family communications. It is talking with, not to, but talking with your family members. I believe that one of the most significant roadblocks that we have to effective and goal-oriented estate and succession planning by farm and ranch families is the lack of high-quality family communications. Of course, there are subjects we just don't talk about. And of course, we do not practice good communications, but we need to. We need to talk with our families to learn what each person wants for all of those things in our life boxes. Who wants that buffet? Who wants Grandpa's Spurs? What do we want as a family to happen to the farm or ranch? Is there more than one person that wants to take over the operation? Who wants to own land, have access to the land only, or could care less about it? And what do we want for our funerals? Who should be invited or not invited, etc. And as we talk with our families, we need to be open and honest, and we need to listen what others are saying and what they're feeling, all that body language. I was facilitating a family meeting with a ranch family here in Eastern Colorado, and Dad always assumed that the eldest son was going to take over. And that was the plan. In fact, they had a succession plan, which was actually his estate plan, to make that happen. And we got in this meeting, and all of a sudden, the second son said, well, I would like to take over the ranch as well. This came to complete surprise to every other family member. It was, in fact, the meeting ended shortly thereafter because it was such a shock and people were not in a position to even talk about the options with that. Sad to say, Dad has now passed away and Mom is having to work through this. In working with the attorney, we've gotten some bridge strategies in place. Hopefully Mom makes some decisions pretty soon. There's also a lot of confusion when it comes to conversations by farm and ranch families. And there's nothing unique about American farmers and ranchers and those around the world. As I have been at some conferences and interacted with farmers and ranchers around the world, the issues are all the same. We commingle the business life and the family life. We tend to talk about the same subjects at the same time. There are then misunderstandings, confusions, important things not said. And John Baker, some of you have heard him speak. He's from Iowa State University, uses 4 or 5 categories to help explain this confusion. And I want to run through those real quickly as a reminder. Location is the first category. Where do we have those important conversations? A common problem is that we typically combine the family system with business conversations. If a business meeting is held at Mom and Dad's house, where does Dad sit? He has 2 places, the head of the table or his recliner. And so he takes on that family role. He is a patriarch. What's Mom doing? The typical mom and grandmother thing. She's making sure everyone's comfortable, has cookies, watching the grandkids, etc. Another example is dad and son they're working together on the place. They have a lot of conversations in the shop, the barn, while driving the pickup, and then they don't share the information and decisions with other family members. I believe these business meetings should be conducted in a business setting. The second category is role. A conversation about family business requires the individuals to assume the role of current or future business principals and not the role of dad, mom, son, daughter-in-law, whoever the case may be. While facilitating these family conversations, I've even asked families members to use first names only, not the daughter, not mom, not dad, in hopes that the family will see this as a business discussion. Then there's vocabulary. We tend to mix family language that we understand with business language. And we really need to use just business language as we have these conversations. Of course, anytime you have two or more people, there's going to be conflict or disagreement, especially in times of stress. So it's better to do it early. The problem is that when conflict arises, the communication breaks down, it becomes fractured. People avoid one another. I strongly suggest, as does John, that there's a method in place for solving the conflict and discussing alternatives before the start of the conversation. Here's how we're going to do it. And when do we do it? The timing. When do we have these? Typical timing is when everyone's together, especially as we're scattered around the world. We do it at Christmas time, birthdays, Thanksgiving, and time is short. We got to, mom's preparing the meal or doing whatever she does, and maybe the daughters and daughters-in-law are helping. And I know I'm being a bit sexist or biased in using these examples, but I want to, they work very well in the traditional roles. The point is, we get into our family mode at those times, and the business discussions become secondary, or people are out of the room when someone makes a point. I strongly suggest you separate those family activities from the business discussions. You have a set time. We're going to meet, we're all getting together for Father's Day, but the next day or the day before, we're going to have a business meeting, and we're going to do it at the insurance agent's office or the bank's meeting room or wherever it is, the extension office. There's a number of places you can have these. And I offer two types of meetings for discussing business issues. And these meetings are very strategic in nature rather than operational. I mean, sure, it's okay when you're in the shop to say, we're going to plant this variety of corn versus another. We're going to buy some white-faced bulls as opposed to some hybrid bulls, whatever the case may be. The first type of meeting is called family council meeting. And it's truly a time for all the family members to share their perception and desires and to listen what others want to have happen. I'm often asked to participate and to facilitate these meetings. The other question I get on this is, who should be involved? Well, I say everyone that can now be involved in the operation or has an impact on that family. Yes, this includes the in-laws. I know if I have a family meeting without my wife and I go home, the first thing Vanessa does is ask, what happened? What was discussed? Were decisions made? And I give her my perception, what I heard based on my biases. And I blew off what my youngest sister said because she's the baby of the family, whatever the case may be. And it's really wrong. So bring them all together. Our spouses have great influence on us. The other strategic meeting is what is called a family business meeting. And this involves those people that are active in the operation. So if son and daughter-in-law and mom and dad are involved in the operation, you meet. Yes, it may be once a month. We're going to meet at mom and dad's house for coffee first thing in the morning, and we're going to talk about strategic issues, opportunities, cost, et cetera. Again, this is not a management issue. These meetings should be treated as meetings. There needs to be an announcement. Have an agenda. In some cases, there may need to be some assignments. If the agenda item is to talk about the land, someone needs to go to the courthouse and do some research on who actually owns that land. This needs to be, especially the family council meeting in that neutral setting. Maybe you want a facilitator, and it's not to run the meeting. In some cases it can be, but it's to tell those talkers in the family to please be quiet and to listen to others and to draw out, to elicit the thoughts and opinions and comments by those that are more quiet, and then publish those minutes. And there can be some follow-up. In estate planning, as with other work, we economists have 3 basic questions. Where are you? Where do you want to go? And how can you best get there? Before we can go anywhere, we need to know where we are. That second question is, what's out there? What do we envision as the future? And it's only in answering these 2 questions that we can choose the best path for us to get from where we are to where we want to go. And it's our team that's going to help us answer that third question. Question 1, where are you, can be divided into 2 categories, personally and business-wise. On the personal side, you need to describe your family. What is your marital status? The attorney will need a list of your children and their relevant information, including contact data. Are there special needs children, or do mom and dad live with you at the end of their lives? What are their roles? What is your net worth aside from the farm or ranch? Do you have some retirement accounts? Are there pensions? Do you own a cabin up in Summit County, Colorado, where you get away for the summer, or maybe you go skiing in the winter? What insurance policies do you have? What about those personal possessions of emotional value? And are there any gifting plans in place? On the business side, and many farmers and ranchers hate this first thing, we need your financial statements. What's the net worth of that farm or ranch? Does that business cash flow? Is it profitable? It's unrealistic to expect if a retiring rancher is 84 years old, he should not expect his 60-year-old son to move back from Chicago to take over the ranch. That's not going to work. Do they want to, no matter what the age of our successor, do we really want that successor to come back and earn $30,000 a year and have to work 24/7 as farmers and ranchers do, and take all the risk that we do? What are those numbers? And of course, where are all of our accounts, from our brokerage accounts, our charge accounts? Who do we charge things to? Is it just the co-op, or is it somewhere else? Of course, on both of these, where's the location? Where are the documents kept? And who can access those? But it's really important to be transparent, to share this information with our kids. Quite often our kids, they just want to know that we have enough money to live on in retirement. Are we talking large estate taxes, etc.? The second question is, where do you want to go? Where does our family want the operation to go? What is that future that we envision? Is there someone that wants to take over the ranch? Or just to own the land, as I said? Our plans will be somewhat dependent on our spouses, if we have a spouse or ex-spouse or deceased spouse. What happens what do we want when whichever spouse dies first? What are the financial needs of that surviving spouse? What happens if that spouse gets remarried? I remember a story that I learned from an attorney in a small town east of Pueblo here, where husband and wife had both lost their spouses, their first spouses, and they got married, and they were farming together, and they were sitting down at the attorney's office, and it was obvious they had a lot of discussion about this. And the attorney looked at the wife and asked her, who's going to get your, or looked at the husband and asked, who's going to get your farm? And he said, my children. And then the attorney looked at the wife and asked her, and she said, my children. And the husband said, stop right there. I paid for your farm. When we got married, you were in great debt, and I used my farm to pay for your farm. So my children should get your farm. He viewed it as buying that farm. Now, I'm not saying either one was right or wrong. It's just that they had not had this discussion before they were paying $400 an hour to an attorney to have an argument. Of course, citizenship of our children makes a big difference. Are they US citizens? In my case, we had to make some changes because my daughter-in-law is a citizen of a country not the US. So we made some changes, put some strategies in place to make that work. And then what is your timeline? When do you want to retire? When do you want to start slowing down? When do you want to quit? When do you want this transition to happen? An analogy I use in this case is, what do you want for a new house? Do you want 4 bedrooms, 3 baths? Do you want 1 large bedroom? Do you want an open concept? Do you want basement? Not to build the house, but what do you want for that house? And the third question is, how can you best get there? This step is where you put together that strong team of experts to help you, whoever they may be. Of course, there's ongoing family communications. You're not turning over all the work to the team members, the attorney, the insurance agent, et cetera. There's still going to be work for you. And I can't emphasize this enough. You need to be honest with yourself, with your family, and your advisors. And then, of course, you have to implement that plan. I can't tell you how many people I've worked with that have had a new will drawn up and never signed it, or there were titles to assets that were never signed over. They didn't go to the courthouse and change the names on that title. So it's truly letting the pros build your house. Now let's talk about some of the issues, opportunities, and strategies you might want to consider as you start to build your legacy plan or you revise any existing estate and succession plans. You may not have the final answers until you consult with your team members, but you need to educate yourself on these. The tax code is kind of crazy right now. As Jay said, I sit on the National Farm Income Tax Task Force, and we're trying to stay up with this, meeting with senators and representatives, their staffs. A couple of us were even reached out to by the White House to learn some things. And as you can see in that I'll call it tan box. The estate tax credit is $11.7 million now. We still have a step up in basis if that transition of ownership occurs at death. And if not, it continues with the new owners will have our owners unless it's purchased. And we're reading all sorts of things right now. One strategy for Congress is to let the current law expire, and that is for tax years beginning after 12/31 of 2025. And it'll go down, the state tax credit will go to about 3.5 million, et cetera. There's a few other changes that are not included here. There's also the one that we're talking about or hearing Congress talk about for possible legislation. And we've heard that a state tax credit going from anywhere from 1 million to 3.5 million with the lifetime gifting exemption of 1 million. Annual gifting, we don't know anything about. The one that we're hearing, not only the 1 million or 3.5 million, but also that when those assets are transferred at our death, the new owners, our heirs in many cases, will have to pay capital gains on that immediately. So there's no kicking the can down the road. It will happen at this time. What will happen? We don't know, but we do know it will change. And again, we just don't know how. As farmers and ranchers, we really tend to commingle, as I said, our personal lives and our business lives. We don't differentiate ownership of our farm or ranch from the management of that farm or ranch. We think of those as one and the same, and we really need to separate those. Anyone can own a ranch. You just have to have money. That's all it takes. And really, ownership can be thought of is the land. Who owns that land? Management, on the other hand, is responsible for the financial performance of the business. It requires the right skills, the right competencies. How do you utilize that land to generate profits? The other question is, who wants to farm? Or who wants to own the farm? These are important questions. As we talk about estate planning and giving and succession planning, fairness arises. And it's a hard concept for all of us to understand. It really includes being able to see from another's perspective. What is your viewpoint about fair? And you can ask all your children, and if you have 5 children, they're all going to have a different viewpoint on what is fair. There's 2 definitions of fair: equal and equitable. Equal is all persons are treated the same. Heirs get the same amount, be it land, money, whatever it is. Maybe it's even emotional value, but it's the same. Equitable, on the other hand, is fairness in that it takes into account differences. I'm the eldest child in my family. I think everything should go to the eldest son, just like we did in the old country. Maybe it's gender. Maybe it's needs. If we have a child that is worth $50 million, maybe he doesn't need the farm to earn a living, and we have someone else that does. Maybe we have someone that comes back and helps take care of us in our waning years. Whatever those differences are, we describe those and we use those to be fair. Let me give you an example to further describe the problems with equal versus equitable. Let's assume we have 3 children, 4 parcels of land, the two on the lower left are equal to the other two. We want to be fair. Who gets which parcel on this? Difficult to say, isn't it? Does this help if we know that, there's vines and there's cropland and there's pasture? Well, maybe one son likes to farm and doesn't like livestock. Maybe someone wants mountains, whatever the case may be. Does this help if we know where headquarters is? What if there's a great stream through this property that allows for fishing? I personally am not a fisherman, so that doesn't mean a lot to me. Now there's a windmill or some other, maybe it's a set of solar panels, whatever the case may be. Does this help us in being fair as we divide this place up? I suggest an alternative to this. Keep the place whole and have it owned by a single entity. By transferring that land into this entity, all the children could own equal shares of that entity. They don't own the land, they own the business that owns the land. Of course, there needs to be rules for exiting ownership, how the land is used, etc. If one of the children wants to take over the operation, a lease can be arranged for him or her to do so. And I further suggest that the person leasing the land pay fair market rates. This is in dispute, but that's okay. Let me give you an example adding on to this. Here's the rental income and the company expenses. So the distribution to those three kids is $2,500. Well, if one child takes over the farm, he's going to pay rent of the $6,000 and the $2,000, equaling his costs are going to be $8,000. But if you subtract his share of the distributions, his rent of that operation is $5,500. So it turns out to be less than fair market value. It's important to note, if you don't have an estate plan, the law provides one for you. Now, this is scary in that some judge or other outsider is going to decide what happens to your farm or ranch and other wealth. Quite often I hear, we're going to just let the kids take care of it. They'll deal with it. Well, in most cases, the land gets sold, especially if those children, those heirs don't agree on who gets it, etc. It becomes a problem. If you want your farm or ranch to continue being operated by the family, you need to select a successor. Don't assume who will be that person. Have a family discussion and then mentor that person. Explain the whys. Don't just tell them. Don't treat them as an employee and allow that person to grow in management of that operations. You need to be open to new ways of thinking. Transfer knowledge in order for success. Help that person be successful in the operation to stay in business. And what does your retirement look like? We don't think about it very often, but we need to. How are we going to spend our time? Are we going to travel? Do we want to play with the grandchildren and great-grandchildren? Are we going to volunteer? Do we still want to be involved in the operation? If we do, can we transition from operating that, managing it, and owning it to simply being the hired man or the gopher? Some of us are excited about giving up the stresses of managing that and turning it over to someone else. Of course, long-term care is a huge problem in this country. We are getting older. It's long-term care insurance is one way to cover the cost for those of us that are qualified to and able to purchase such insurance. Colorado and Nebraska have a partnership plan. I don't understand it very well, but It does help maintain some of those assets. The problem is not all plans meet the criteria of what Colorado and Nebraska call a partnership plan. You need to ask ahead of time. Of course, Medicare will provide a safety net. They'll pay for the nursing home if we have no money. Typically, we can only have about $2,500 of wealth. And it's critical to note what you see in blue, that transfers for less than fair market value within 60 months, 5 years of Medicaid application, are considered available resources and penalties will be assessed. So we can't, sell it for $1 and one day and go into a nursing home and expect Medicaid to pick that up the next day. It's the rules have changed on that. I just looked it up this morning. I've got an app on my phone. In Colorado, a nursing home in a semi-private room is $8,000 a month, $100,000 a year. Can you afford to pay for that? If the farmer ranch is going to pay for it, can they take that? Can the farmer ranch afford that much cash outflow on a monthly or an annual basis? What's the preferable time for transferring our farm or ranch to the successor? If you do it before death, there's some downsides. Taxes may be different. There's no step up in basis. But we, as the retiring generation, have more control over that process, and we can transfer our knowledge, as I said, to the next generation. If it happens at death, typically happens very quickly. Someone has to step in. There may be estate taxes, but on the other hand, there's a step up in basis. Some attorneys and some counselors, if you will, suggest two different multiple entities. Land goes into one, machinery and livestock and operations go into another, and then there's leases back and forth for that. I and some of the attorneys that I work with suggest three multiple entities, one for land, one for those depreciable assets, the breeding livestock, the machinery and equipment, et cetera, and then the operations. And of course, there's leases back and forth and rent payments, et cetera, that we can take care of those. Let me give you a quick example of how that might happen. In the blue cylinder, you see land is owned 50% by mom and dad. And as it transitions over time, it goes 20% to daughter one, 20% to daughter two, and 80% to the son who's on the farm. And you can see we've transitioned this over time through gifting, some cases purchases. However, we want to do that as according to our plan. Conservation easements are one strategy for obtaining cash into our operation, maybe paying for retirement. It's actually a sale of assets, all those development rights. Remember, it is a forever commitment, and we now have new and additional partners in that operation. Just worked a month ago with a ranch that has a conservation easement, and we were restricted on how we could split that up and develop it. And in some cases, the one son that wanted to move back could not build a house on his share of the ranch because the conservation easement restricted that. Again, it may limit our opportunities as we move into that. Another strategy is gifts of life insurance. We can gift money to our children, for example, and they can buy a life insurance on us. Now, if we use the 15,000 limit, mom could give 15,000 to daughter, son or dad could gift 15,000 to daughter, so the premium could go up to $30,000. It's one strategy. It may not work for you, but it's worth considering. Many of us have heard of lifetime trusts, and then there are also a new strategy called lifetime leases. These trusts are typically used where mom transfers ownership of her house to a trust and then continues to live there until her death or some other specified time. And then it goes back to whatever the plan says. The lifetime leases are a valuable tool in that, as my example shows, dad can transfer ownership of the land to his successor. You know, he was always a cow guy. So he leases pasture for 10 cows and a bull. Maybe it's enough grass to run those cows and that bull, or maybe it's a particular pasture, and in bad years, he's going to have fewer cows, whatever it is. It allows him, in both of them, in both cases, it allows them some emotional relief. It reduces the stress of transferring that asset to the successor, of knowing that they can stay on the place, of continuing to be known as a rancher, be able to go to the cattlemen's associations, et cetera. So there's some tools there that really bring into the place. In closing, I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about a really important issue. And I want to close with this picture depicted on this slide. I think it's a phenomenal story. This is a mound, they call it, in North Ireland. It's estimated that it took people 30 years to build it so 3,200 years ago, when life expectancy was 35. The large stones you see around the base of that big mound, the smaller ones weigh 2 tons, the larger ones they estimate at 4 tons, and they had to be moved from 50 miles away. So think about all the work that went into this thing that is now seen as a tremendous legacy, not only for their families, but for their country, their area. And when I was there a few years ago, the rocks were on the inside, and I was able to go on the inside of this, were so tight that you could not slip a piece of paper between them. So there's no water leakage, et cetera. So I hope that you choose to leave a lasting legacy and not just an inheritance. It's important that you think about all of this. And I hope that you leave a lasting legacy for your family long into the future, multiple generations. So thank you again. And Jay, I'm going to turn it back to you and see what those questions are.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. A lot of information there to digest. Really appreciate you sharing all that with us and sharing some of those stories. Again, reminder to the audience, if you have questions, you can just type them into the Q&A box, and I'll ask those to Jeff as we have a few minutes here to answer some questions. So the first question I have for you, Jeff, you kind of hit on it then at the end with your mound thing, but just in general, how long should this process last of leaving a lasting legacy?
It's not going to happen overnight. I know of operations that have taken 5 years to just get a plan in place. And then you have to implement that. And sometimes that transition from the retiring generation to the successor generation can take 5-10 years. One way to avoid taxes on the transfer of cow operation, a breeding cow operation, is to have a lease over 5 years or 7 years, the tax period that you're using. And, they're leased to the daughter who's going to be the cow girl, and she's going to make lease payments. and replace that herd. So keep that herd at 100 head. Dad would get whatever, it's either a cash lease or maybe a percentage of the calf crop and the cull cow receipts. And it builds up, and all of, over that 5 to 7 year period, dad no longer has cows and daughter has taken over that operation at a much lower cost to her than would normally happen. So, I've got a family I'm working with now that in 2 years, we still haven't gotten to the point where we can decide what they want to build that house. So you need to plan on 5 years.
Very good. And you mentioned the different entities and holding land and equipment and so on. So a question came in about debt and, how's basically you got some land paid for, some with debt and so on and so forth. What are some of the, are there difficulties with that when it comes to putting those things in entities that need to be considered?
Depends on a number of things, but the main factor is agreement by the creditor. Who holds that debt? Some banks, some lending institutions, because there's farm credit, are very amenable to transferring that land and the debt into a legal entity. Others are not. There may be some restrictions there. So you really need to work with the CPA, with an attorney, and with the banker in that case to see what options are available on that if there is debt.
Okay. And you mentioned a will, but of course, a lot of people just say, well, I have a will. That's my plan. Of course, having recently, I lost my mother recently, and my wife lost her mother. So we've read a couple of wills very recently and know that they can be very generic. So any advice on that when your parents, the second generation, your parents say they got a will and that'll take care of things. What's the appropriate way to handle that when you don't know what's in it or how detailed it is, or some of these plans, how to simply, or, the second generation talk to their parents constructively to get past just saying, I have a will?
Well, first of all, that they have a will is a good thing. Only about 58% of Americans have a will. And in the workshops I've done over the last 5 years throughout Colorado and a few other places, states, it was only 1/3 of people had wills, farmers and ranchers in these workshops, which is really scary because in Colorado, we do not even need to have those wills notarized nor witnesses to our signature. So that's the first thing, get a will. Second thing is, we as the second generation need to ask our parents, what's in your will? Let's have a conversation about this. What do you want to have happen to this? Don't surprise us. We go to the funeral and we've all seen movies and heard about stories, went to the funeral, and then we met with the attorney the next morning and we all got surprised. Well, that's a terrible thing to do to your kids. I mean, do you really love them or not? And I use that as a stick, not a carrot. It's like, Mom, do you love me enough to share this? And it's like, well, that sounds cold-hearted and cruel, but it's one stick or carrot, however it is to use. We need to know what's in there and have that conversation and say, well, why did you do that, Mom? Why are you giving the house to my sister? And Mom may have a very good reason for that you as a second generation had never thought about. Or maybe it's like, let's say you, Jay, and let's say you have one sister, and Mom goes, well, your sister's getting the house. Your sister could care less about the house, doesn't need it, and you're the one that has an emotional attachment to that house and could use the benefit of selling it, or you want to move into it. Well, maybe you then agree that Jay gets a house and the sister gets something else. It's the conversations around the why of that. But we have to go to our parents. If they don't come to us, we need to go to our parents. Likewise, Mom, do you have a DNR? What's it say? Who's your personal representative? Who have you granted power of attorney to, et cetera? So we have to force the conversation, Jay.
Okay, thanks. And so along those lines with the will, and you mentioned on the legacy pillars, the family keepsakes and all these little things. How does one make sure, other than just telling people, how does one make sure things go to who they want them to go to?
Well, again, it goes back to the conversation. Have a family gathering sometime and walk through the house and say, here's this buffet. I think it should go to Johnny and his wife because, his wife brings everyone together and is the cook. None of my kids like to cook. She loves to cook, and it would go really well in her kitchen or hallway or wherever and the kids can agree or say, no, it should not go to Johnny. I want it. It's a conversation. And what I like is the stories that go with it. Now, why is it important to Mom? Well, it came down from Grandma. And remember, Grandma's family came across from Oklahoma, moved during the Dust Bowl from Oklahoma to northwestern Colorado in a covered wagon, or they had 6 kids in an old 1946 pickup. What's the story behind it? That's the thing. It's the stories that go with it. Or maybe there's kids like my sons. One lives on Grand Cayman Island, and the other one, he doesn't want anything in terms of possessions that he can't put in the back of his pickup. So he doesn't want those. Let him go to someone that will care for him and share them. So it's a conversation again. I harp on that a lot. It's that conversation.
Okay, thanks. And we do have a hand raised. So Lori, I'm going to go to you and unmute your microphone. So Lori, you can, I think, now talk. Can you unmute her, Ryan? It looks like she's still muted. Lori, are you there?
She's still muted on my screen.
Yeah. You'll have to unmute yourself, Lori. We've unmuted you on our end, but you got to click on your microphone there to unmute your microphone.
There we go.
There you are. Okay, go ahead.
My name is Lori, but I didn't have a question.
Oh, your hand is up. Sorry.
So I don't know well, actually, I do have a question.
Okay.
I came in late to your meeting. And so if you have family members who who haven't prepared to pass things down, and you mentioned the 5-year thing with Medicare, is that after 5 years, are you guaranteed that the nursing homes can't, or Medicare can't come in and take the farm?
Well, I will use the caveat first that there's no guarantees, but at this point, that is current law. It is Medicaid can only go back 5 years from the date of application. So if you do it 5 years and if ownership is transferred out of dad's name, 5 years and 1 day prior to applying for Medicaid, they can't go after that wealth. If it's within that 5-year look back period, they can. And they have a fiduciary responsibility to do so. Now, that's only if you want Medicaid to pay for your long-term care. If you're going to pay for it, or use insurance to pay for it or whatever the case may be, different story. But if Medicaid is involved, they have, again, a fiduciary responsibility to see what your wealth is during that 5-year period.
Okay. Thank you for your question, Lori. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions coming in, Jeff, and I see that we're past the top of the hour here. So we'll go ahead and, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us here today. We really appreciate it. And know that this is a tough subject, right? And very complicated subject, both from the tax law standpoint, the estate planning standpoint. We do get one more question here. We have, could you talk about the complications that ensue when members of multiple generations inherit a single farm? Yeah, this is actually, they give a very, very valid situation where you say have a sister and then another sibling that has passed. And so it goes to the next generation.
It goes to the next generation. Well, you're all owners of the farm. And so, I mean, let me step back and say that needs to be included in that succession plan or estate plan. What happens if son passes away and it goes on to the children? What happens at that point? And some points can be put into those plans to ease that transition. A competent attorney is going to make that happen, because this happens. Before I continue here, I've talked with multiple times with a family in Colorado in which this happened, and actually it wasn't the sibling did not pass away. Well, the sibling passed away. It went to his wife, who was a non-US citizen, and she left the country. She went back to her home country, and they can't access it. So they had to go through, I can't even remember how long a period it was for the judge to rule that, the siblings still here in the United States owned the farm, that person gave up those rights. That gets really complicated in a legal way. This is where, when it's, as the question asked, those strategies need to be put into those plans, and the sister needs to call her nieces and nephews together and have that conversation. And it may take a facilitator, it may take an attorney to make that happen. What gets scary is, let's make this example even worse, is they're not just biological children, but there are stepchildren involved. And, came in at a late marriage or something. We can take this a lot of ways. It needs to start with sister bringing those nieces and nephews together and having a conversation. Where do we go? And explaining, if we don't agree on something, it's going to go to court. Now, what do you want to have happen?
Thanks. That gets tough in a hurry.
It does.
Yeah. So Don has his hand up. Don, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you here. So you probably have to unmute your own microphone too. You're unmuted on my end. There you go, Don. Go ahead.
Yeah, my question is, number one, where do you think the federal estate tax is going to go? And I know you talked about that a little, and the capital gains. And do you think it's ever possible for us to not receive a stepped up basis? I mean, they can do it, but will that ever happen where people die and you don't receive a stepped up basis for the land? Go Pokes.
There we go. Anyway, if anyone knows what Congress will do, I want to talk with you. I don't trust Congress as far as I can throw my house. But our conversations as we follow these tax codes, we don't know. We truly don't know, and we can't get any inkling about whether Congress will just let the current tax code expire. And then basically, I mean, the major difference is that a state tax credit will be on estates at 3.5 million. There will still, as we understand, that one will still have portability and step up in basis. The other one, the legislation that is going through the process, the legislative process, committees and subcommittees and investigation, et cetera, that will do away with step up in basis. So at the time of death, those assets will transfer ownership and capital gains will have to be paid by the estate. Is what they're talking about within the last, up until this past Monday, 4 days ago. That's the latest we heard, that they were still talking about that. That has not been taken from the table yet, Don. So that's a real concern, is that there won't be step up in basis. And I mean, how is an estate going to afford land? Let's say it's been in the family for generations. I mean, you could have $50, $100 an acre land that is now worth $10,000. So that's what they're looking at.
Thanks for the question, Don. Definitely something to keep in mind here. Got a couple more hands up. If you're ready, if you're willing to keep going, Jeff, I know we're after.
No, I am fine. I apologize. I took too long in my presentation, but I didn't give ample room, so I have time.
Let's go to Doug next. Doug, I unmuted you on my end. If you unmute yours, you should be able to ask a question. There you go.
Can you hear me okay?
You sure can.
Okay. I just thought I'd share and maybe get your thoughts. Here in the last couple of years, there's farmland involved, a couple different properties. Both my parents passed away within 1 year. And we finally get everything settled. And then my wife and I had never had a will with our adjoining ground. And now I own half of what my parents had. And so we sat down with our kids, because my parents lived a good life, and I'm approaching 70 pretty quick. And it's kind of like, it's too late for me to do a whole lot. So we went to our children and said, what do you want it to look like? What can we do to help it get to where you want it? And what do you want it to look like when our time comes? Because that time's not that far away. And this seemed to be been very helpful, very helpful conversations. And you find out really, what do they want? Because again, it's, for me, I can play with it. There's some things I can do to improve the property. I can help them and get them out here to help working on the portion that they want or whatever they want, and get them involved right now. So it's almost like passing it down before I die, before my wife and I die. But it gets the kids involved now and gets them thinking now. And it's not a surprise like the day after the funeral, because there's enough of those sort of surprises that take place based on our recent experience. So I just thought I'd share that. And if you have any thoughts or have known any other people that have done something similar.
Well, first of all, I want to congratulate you on having that conversation with your children. That's important. I suggest you, now that you've had you've started that conversation and you're along the process there, you need to talk to an attorney, because that will may be insufficient, especially if it was written prior to you receiving ownership of that land from your parents. And you need to look at, okay, how do we do this to keep it in the family if that's the goal? How do we, if they don't want it, whatever the case may be, it's important to get really good legal counsel on that, because at 70, I mean, it's never too late to start the process of this. Certain things can happen, and especially while we hope that Congress won't get anything done, pass any legislation on this that will be retroactive to, say, 1/1 of 2021. So we have a few months of leeway here. Some things can happen yet. And so it may be that you're able to, because the lifetime gifting, you can gift up to 11.7 million. Basically, you're using your lifetime or your estate tax credit while you're still alive. So it's 11.7 million that you can gift away at one time, multiple times to multiple people, whatever it is. It's just on your end, it's capped at 11.7. Well, that goes a long ways. Even if your estate is 20 million, you can get rid of 11 million rather quickly and give them a good start, and then you can deal with the rest of it. So there's some strategies that could happen that a good, competent attorney can put into place.
That's why we waited until my parents' estate was settled in. So we had that discussion with our children, and now we're having our will, the final copy drawn up right now. And then we're going to sit down and discuss the will and power of attorney, medical power of attorney, all of that with our kids before we sign it, see if there's any changes they want.
Yeah.
There's always a lot to learn.
But there may be, Doug, opportunity for succession, that transition can happen prior to your death as opposed to post-death. It may be advantageous in your case, may not be, but it may be advantageous to transition ownership now, which means a succession plan, not just the will and other documents that go into an estate plan. So again, talk with an attorney.
Sure.
We can visit with that, but there's opportunities there prior to death.
When we were cautioned by the attorney that, if the property is actually, and that's one thing I'm going to do is get everything out of my name or our name. But if one of the kids got into financial trouble, where they were forced to sell or needed to come up with a lot of money and their name's on the land, that it could take away the very heritage that we seek to maintain. Correct.
Now, with all this conversation about changes to the tax code, the 11.7 is going to go down. We know that. And unless there's a new legislation, it will expire, like I said, 12/31 of 25. And at 70, you're going to, most likely, we never know when we're going to pass away. I mean, that's only 4 years away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's going to change. So if your estate is over 3.5 million, your attorney may want to have you may want to have that conversation with your attorney to say, hey, I've got more than this. We need to do something to get rid of it now while that credit is higher. Yes, there is a problem. When you gift it away to someone else, they're in full control. It may be, and I don't know your case, but a trust may be beneficial in that there are numerous types of trust. Like at one count I heard there's 400 different trust and subtypes of trust and categories of trust, et cetera. So there may be some advantages and ways that you can handle that. Again, I don't know your case. I don't know anything other than your name at this point, but
Sure.
Those can be, I would go back to the attorney and ask again, because there's some concern and see, and he or she may say, nope, not going to happen. It's as it should be. But you need to, I would suggest you go back just to satisfy your concerns.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
You bet.
Thanks for your question, Doug. And Lori is back. Um, Lori, you must have liked the answer, or maybe you didn't like the answer to the first question.
No, I just have a question related to what the last gentleman talked about, which was trying to protect the farm so that like the kids don't get taxed, be overly taxed, and have to sell the farm in order to have the farm. Would it be better to form a corporation with them, and can it be passed down through that way?
I won't address corporations specifically. I'll use the term legal entity, meaning to include corporations, subchapter S corporations, LLCs, whatever the case may be. There's a number of those now. That makes it rather easy if it goes into a legal entity, because then you don't have to transfer this parcel of land or this specific piece of equipment. You can transfer, you can gift, you can sell shares of your ownership in that business entity, that legal entity. It's and you can still maintain control. You can, if you have a manager managed LLC, you can be the hired manager and control it until such time as that is specified. Maybe it's your death, maybe it's you're tired of it, but then it can go, more of it can go to them. They can still receive the profits. You can split ownership from operational profits on that. I don't know if I answered your question, Lori, or not.
Good enough. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Lori. Okay, so with that, I think we'll go ahead and draw it to a close. Jeff, I really appreciate you sticking around and answering these other questions. Some people have asked about if it would be possible to post your slides so that they can view them. And I understand that some of that information is timeless and some of it could be not valid after tax laws change. But if you're willing to do that, we could go ahead and post those for a period of time that you deem appropriate.
Okay, I will send them to you, Jay.
Okay. And again, we just, when the tax laws change, which they inevitably will, we can deal with that and make sure people aren't getting old information in terms of that stuff.
Right.
And then somebody else asked about the recording. We do record all these, and they will be posted on our website, which is cap.unl.edu. And the CAP, of course, stands for Center for Ag Profitability. So if you go there, sometime tomorrow, we'll have this recording up there and posted, and you can view it there. And we also have recordings from our past webinars and of course, a schedule for upcoming webinars that you can register for. In our chat box, there'll be a link there to a short 3-question survey that we ask you to fill out for us. If you would, that would be very helpful to us. It helps provide feedback not only on this webinar, but also feedback or information to use for scheduling upcoming speakers and topics. And we always appreciate suggestions. So next week, our webinar will be with Jim Jansen presenting the 2021 Nebraska Farm Real Estate report, which we always is one of our most popular reports that we get out here from our Center for Ag Profitability. And Jim, of course, is one of our state agricultural economists and has been doing that report for a number of years. And he'll review the latest trends in land values and cash rental rates across the state. So be sure to join us at noon next Thursday for that webinar. And with that, I think I've taken care of all the housekeeping things. So just once again, thank you, Jeff, very much for spending time with us today and sharing your expertise. And I thank all of our listeners for joining us and hope you really enjoyed the webinar and hope you all have an excellent remainder of today and on into the future.